Corruption in the United States is the act of government officials abusing their political powers for private gain, typically through bribery or other unethical methods. Transparency in a business or government context is honesty and openness with the public and citizens of America. Key issues of corruption include the influence of wealthy individuals over government, pay-to-play politics and the revolving doors between elected government office, for-profit companies, and professional associations, and the abuse of the U.S. financial system by corrupt foreign kleptocrats and local elites. U.S. citizens are affected in many small ways by government corruption. During the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, there were multiple cases of corruption within the medical field because of the limited supply of products and the inflated prices. People abuse and take advantage of those weak spots in the system, which lead to incredible amounts of corruption, shown in a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, estimated that $98 billion were lost to fraud and abuse in Medicare and Medicaid in 2011 alone. Causes of corruption include greed of money, desires, higher levels of market and political monopolization, low levels of democracy, weak civil participation and low political transparency, higher levels of bureaucracy and inefficient administrative structures, low press freedom, low economic freedom. This quote by John Acton states, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." This quote is talking about the more power that somebody has, the more likely they are to corrupt. And when they do corrupt, the more power they have, the bigger the corruption will be. 3 weeks before Donald Trump became president, he promised to, quote, drain the swamp, quote, of corruption in our nation's capital. "I will make our government honest again, believe me," he tweeted 3 weeks before Election Day. Nearly 6 in 10 people said that the level of corruption had risen from 2016 to 2017, while Donald Trump was in office. In 2018, Transparency International ranked the United States as the 22nd least corrupt country, falling from 18th since 2016. In 2019, the United States received its lowest CPI score in 8 years. CPI stands for Corruption Perceptions Index. The United States dropped 2 points to score 69 out of 100, 100 being not corrupt and 0 being very corrupt. The 2020 Corruption Perceptions Index isn't out yet. There's a trend of slowly getting more and more corrupt in the United States. Here's a short video showing the extent of corruption in the United States and how easy it is to get away with it.
Until I saw this one graph. Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question. Does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left at 0% are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right at 100% are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea, the most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So if you've ever felt like your opinion doesn't matter and that the government doesn't really care what you think, well, you're right. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it? We pay for it with the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay for it with a tax code that's a complete mess. We pay for it with internet that's slower and more expensive, with wasteful spending, a floundering education system, a catastrophic drug war, and 1 in 5 American children born into poverty. Almost every major issue we face as a nation can be traced back to this graph. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. You know, there's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America. And as long as it is, anyone who can spend money to buy political influence will.
In my opinion, corruption is overlooked and not stressed enough. Too many people are too afraid to say anything in fear of the power that higher government officials and politicians hold. I also think that not enough people know what is actually going on in the government, and it is very hard to know all of the facts. Which is why, in order to start fighting against corruption, our government needs to be more transparent and let the American citizen in on what is going on in this country and the honest truth, even if it sheds a bad light on politicians. 28% of people said that voting for a clean candidate with a party committed to fighting corruption is the most effective thing they could do. Speak up and raise awareness. If nobody knows about corruption, nobody's going to do anything about it. Another thing you can do is stop supporting businesses who support corruption. Lastly, signing petitions and reporting corruption are the best things that you can do to stop corruption. What we can do to fix corruption little by little in the U.S. government. They need to provide protection for whistleblowers so that they are more likely to call out corruption instead of just letting it pass in fear of powerful people. To increase administration so that there are less chances for revolving doors and people to corrupt without anybody noticing. We need more citizen participation. If the citizens are able to participate more in the government, there will be less corruption and more transparency. The last thing we need is transparency in the government. If the government is completely honest with the people and tells them what they're spending their money on, there would not be any corruption and the people could feel like they could trust the government. More than in any other major developed country, people in America believe that rich people buy elections, said Scott Graytack, Advocacy Director for Transparency International's U.S. office. When people think their government is for sale, they stop believing in its future. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. This is my works cited along with a more extensive page that I already turned in.